This is the Mind Body Detox Podcast, where we discuss all things integrative health and wellness, interviewing folks from all over the world, sharing insights and wisdom on how to live a healthier life in mind, body, and spirit. So we are back with part 2 of Healing Burnout with Allie Kochert of Root Grow Thrive. Now, as a disclaimer for this episode, we will be diving into the topic of trauma. So if trauma is a trigger for you, just want to let you know ahead of time we will be talking about that topic. And as we mentioned at the beginning of our last episode, everything we share on this podcast episode is for informational and educational purposes only. It's not to take the place of any mental health care professionals or private care. If you are in need of any support, we have included many resources in our show notes. And if you're really enjoying this episode with Allie, we highly encourage you to use the link in our show notes to ask questions, as we're going to have her back for another episode in the future, and this is the time to ask some questions directly that we can include in our next interview. So without further ado, let's get to part 2. One of the things I've realized is so many people are not aware of what the symptoms of trauma are. A lot of times they think that it is through some sort of abuse or some really extreme situation that they've experienced. And I feel that just having awareness around it and education is really important. But I've found that people find the definition of it and they go, "Oh my gosh, yeah, I've been through trauma now," and it kind of puts it in a box. They can help then find different tools and different support systems to support the healing on that journey. So I'd love to talk about what that looks like. And also we can go into over-identifying with it. I think there's two things. There's, oh yeah, that's really helpful. Now I understand this is the definition and this is actually beyond what I thought it was. But then also this over-identification with it. Are we able to talk a little bit about that today?
Sure.
Okay. In my yoga teacher training, we are a trauma-informed training program. And when I was in the course, it was so interesting because they brought up this topic and brought up, hey, if you have been through it, you may not realize that you have. And it's so informative and, again, empowering to have this awareness. So I'm just curious about your training and education and information for us so we can be a little bit more informed about maybe possibly ourselves or even maybe some others as well around us.
Yeah, it's great. It's what my passion is currently, is training people on trauma consciousness. It's increasing awareness as a helper and healer, especially for those in spiritual caregiving listening circles. And so, the way I talk about it is this, that, a lot of us can identify as having chronic stress. We live in a society, we live in the Western world of constantly being barraged by information, living in the information age, right? That impacts in the current psychobiological model, it impacts our neurological systems. So if we are affected every day by stress and our stress response is just sort of going up and up and up, that's chronic stress. Burnout happens is when it gets up, and we don't complete the stress cycle, right? We don't come down. So there's this going up into stress response, physiological stress response, sometimes, often, usually underneath our awareness, and over time it affecting us physiologically. Trauma is that, but often to a nth degree, right? So if we have so there's different types of trauma, right? There's acute trauma of one thing happening to yourself that causes a reaction where your nervous system gets into fight, flight, and freeze mode and gets stuck there. An example of that would be, witnessing a car accident or being in a car accident, and then over time developing PTSD symptoms of that car accident. So therapy would be related to that particular incident. There's also complex trauma, which is related to the attachment systems and the safety systems not being met as a child. So when we talk about complex trauma, it's usually seen later in life with relational difficulties and basically difficulties coping with the stress response. You can see addiction with folks with complex trauma and that kind of thing. So, for anyone interested in that stuff, we'll put lots of trauma resources in the show notes and maybe even do another podcast episode one day on this. But in general, like, trauma is the body's response to a stressful event where we didn't have the capacity to cope with it in the moment. And, that's why complex trauma is special in that, like, we were children. If we had complex trauma, we were children. We didn't have capacity. We needed external support from our parent or from our caregiver to give us structure, to give us mirroring, to give us healthy boundaries, to healthy management of the nervous system so that we can, when we go up, we can come down in safety. So if we didn't have that structure, we're going to struggle later on in life without help. And that's what, a lot of therapies are for when it comes to orienting somatically and body oriented. Because, our bodies are the first line of defense when it comes to stress. So we need to orient ourselves first to that. And that's where we reclaim our safety systems, is somatically, is physiologically. And so that's where, the trauma work starts, often in somatic therapies, and can be helped with trauma-informed yoga, trauma-informed other types of therapies to help reclaim a sense of body safety. When we feel safe in our bodies, we feel safe psychologically and relationally. So that's sort of the basic 101 there.
The word trauma seems like such a strong word. And I know that is something that we associate with certain things. So I love that your education about it gives just awareness that it is the nervous system reacting in a way that it can be, having a burnout from working too much, the nervous system being on high alert from maybe you have a job that you multitask and there's time restraints and it's consistently been like that for 10 years. And then
Right.
And so what I often think about when I think about the body and trauma is I think about animals who have been abused. If you've ever owned an animal or seen an animal that's been abused, how they react to their environment, how they're cautious, they look around, or they're really jumpy, where they all of a sudden what's that noise, And I know that we as humans are also animals. And so we
Yes.
tend to respond the same way. If you have someone in your life that's been in trauma or a car accident, or they've been in shock, or the nervous system can go both ways, where they can get hyperreactive afterwards, or they can shut down and be more in parasympathetic mode, where they're more kind of stunned. If you have people that I've viewed people, they have, there's not a lot of blinking, there's like staring, there's pupil dilation, there's different things that the body does. And I know with your somatic therapies training, you're aware of all this stuff, but I think it's something that until I had this connection between animals that have been gone through something that was traumatic, even if you almost got hit by a car, say the animal almost got hit by a car, and now every time they have that, the fear of cars, it's no different for us as
Yeah.
humans. And I think if we can recognize, and if you have someone in your life that seems to be reactive or jumpy or something, like, I just think considering, you can't ever diagnose someone or say you must be through trauma. I don't ever encourage people to go say that to people, but I find that be very helpful to have awareness around. You don't know what anyone else has been through, and it may just be that they have been working for 10 years in a very high stress job with lots of deadlines and
Right.
multitasking and not been able to shut their nervous system down, and that chronic stress, that can be why there's stuff going on. So do you have anything, what about you think about the animal thing, right?
No, I use that example often in teaching about trauma to people where it's relatively new, because most of us have encountered an animal that was harmed or at least seen one on a video or
Yeah.
whatever. Like that's something that we can be aware of. I think having a prefrontal cortex, this space of higher level thinking and reason and rationalization can sometimes be a liability. And because we are animals, we have a physiological body, yet we can bypass that so fast and say lots of stuff about our reaction. Yet, actually the healing is related to being present and being in relationship with the body and being in relationship with one another. So, I had an image when you shared about that. The concept was like wolves, wolf packs, having the idea like a dog is basically a wolf now, now a dog. So if you were to bring that dog way back to where it innately was for millennia before it became a dog, was in community. It healed in community. It learned to process what happened. If they went through a traumatic event, it was immersed back into the community quickly and cared for by others. And so I surmise that wolf packs often you don't see PTSD, if there's like a bear attack on one animal, right? You don't see PTSD on that actual animal because they have systems in place to prevent that is basic to their structure as a community. And I think that's why we have a crisis in trauma now, is because we are pulled out of community and we're placed upon this often self-imposed pedestal. If I know better, I can do better, I can work through this but yet we, again, millennia ago, we did all this stuff in community. We did it being loved upon and with serious ritual and caregiving that was from the body up, and without that, we feel helpless. We feel like we're out on a limb. So, that is by far one of the biggest things about thriving. We talked about inner work. It's the biggest thing about thriving is what is healthy community for me, so that I can get to a place where I feel rooted in what I'm meant to do and be in this world, but also seen and mirrored back repeatedly so that I can know myself because I am in this circle of protection, love, community, and understanding.
Yeah, so the community piece is just foundational, and I think for my own journey I've experienced that myself as community's gotten anchored, rooting, and that growth from that healing and the support is just I think so important. And I really look forward to seeing more of our culture embrace that. I do think that there's a kind of a pendulum swing that happens in general in our lives. If we get too much of something, we get tired of it, or we burn out, or we decide we need to do something different. So I'm kind of looking forward, because I always see the collective swings in these different trends. That's just how the cycles happen. And I'm going, ooh, there's so much overstimulation that pretty soon it's going to be cool and it's going to be trending and it's going to be the thing to have slow things, like slow food, not fast food, slow. Like their souls are craving it. Their nervous system's obviously going through that traumatized nervous system. Everything's hyper aroused, need it, even if we don't aware of what that is yet. It's just with this type of education and awareness, we will then share that. It will ripple out. We'll tell people about it in our families. We'll have awareness of it for ourselves and recognize, oh, we just need to, slow down here and unwind, unplug. And I think it's much more complex than that for each of our stories. Obviously, we're all different. But I think that in general, I wanted to educate about that and talk about it a little bit, because there seems to be a connection, at least in my journey, of individuals who have gone through some sort of trauma, recognized or not, and being called to the helping healing profession. So do you find that is the case for people you work with as well?
Absolutely. I think it often is the reason why there are so many helpers in the world, is that there has been harm done and there's a need to reclaim voice outside of their own traumas. And I think that's it can be very healthy, for those of us who've had multiple traumas in our lives, myself included. I had some birth trauma. I've had, some traumatic loss in my life, so I think those can be wonderful places of informing us as to how to be supportive to others. I think we need to do our own inner work, certainly around that, because we want to heal from our wounds. We want to heal from our healing places. Obviously, we want to provide support from those places in ourselves that have had support. So, I think we need to be aware of, those shadows that we mentioned before.
Yeah.
I think the other thing, a takeaway I wanted to mention too about community is that it's a privilege to have safe community. It's a real privilege nowadays to find that and to have that. We live in such a disconnected time that the time, energy it takes to even establish and maintain safe community, many of us don't have that. And going back to burnout, one thing I always teach people about burnout when they're learning about it is that it can't be cured, self-care baths and get your flower essences and get yourself a massage and you're all better, right?
Or just go on a vacation, and you're all better. Yeah.
I say that tongue in cheek, but people really believe it. Many of us are high achievers, right? We think okay, just need to check off the box of okay, take care of myself. Got it. Okay, now I'm not burned out, right? Right, everyone? Burnout is systemic. It's a systemic condition. It's physiologically systemic, but it's culturally systemic. It is built upon the foundation of the Western society. It is part and parcel of what happens when communities are not taken care of, when bodies are not taken care of. That's what happens. Is re-traumatization. It's burnout. It's what happens. Going back to my discussion about back in the day when medicine was different. Well, part of why there wasn't burnout is because the system supported a particular way to provide identity and care to that particular healer. Okay, so when we are not given that, we are left wearing devices and our identity can be very diffuse. So if I'm a healer here, then what am I here? And so if our identity is diffuse, we often get to a place of confusion and who am I? And again, the boundary stuff. So again, it really goes back to my systems. who in my life can see me and is a safe person? We sometimes systemically okay, maybe my employer doesn't give me protected time. Maybe my congressman doesn't provide the kind of financial support that my family needs, or even just personal support of being a human in human skin walking around. What are the things I can do? And is that mine to do? Sometimes it isn't mine to do, to march or to go against the grain. Sometimes it isn't at this time. So, just to give people a little bit of just reassurance that if you've done all the things and checked all the boxes and still feel worn out and weary, it's not your fault. It's not because you did something wrong. You're not doing anything. You're not taking care of yourself the way you should. It's often because the system isn't set up for you to thrive.
Yes. I often say to clients when they're healing and kind of recovering, and it is like detoxing, that's mind body detox from this system. That's really what we do. And I say to them sometimes that it is a process, but you also can't think your way out of it. And I think that's where the body piece comes in, because people are always trying to check off the boxes of the mental piece or the they did the self-care, like you said, they did the baths, and they're trying to problem solve it in their mind for a solution, a plan to get to the finish line of solving it, the burnout. And that thinking your way out of it is, having a plan and having support, I think, is really crucial, but it is a process, and it is constantly, I think it takes a really centered in yourself. I think that self-work is so important, because when you can be centered in yourself, especially when there's not community, right? You can be more likely to take these steps that are outside of the cultural norm, that are outside of this systemized, you said, the system that's set up to reinforce this experience. But you have to be strong in yourself to do something that maybe is socially outside the norm, to not stay out late, or not go and this is the activities you're doing, or on social media. Even that's socially acceptable to be on social media for X amount of time a day. And I think that it can make you feel even more isolated, which is of course counterproductive of needing to have the community to heal, if you're trying to do the things that are supporting your healing. So that's why I've had this whole kind of thing that I've started saying, that we live radically in a sense, because the way that people operate now, what's normal to be tired and fatigued and burned out and sick and have relationships issues, all the things, it's normal. It's considered normal, even, water cooler conversation about this is just how it is. And oh yeah. And there's complaining about it and overwhelm and feeling powerless about it, that when people come in, they go, well, you don't have drama at this place and you're with your team? No, we're, oh, you eat this way, you live this way, your self-care is this way. And it seems so out there for people, almost their sense of identity and the sense of self, their ego pushes back and goes, well, I could never do that. They're a little radical that they do it that way. And there's judgment of it because it's so outside of what the program is. And I just encourage people to maybe think about it. What is healthy for you is going to be different. I can't say there's no self-righteousness around the way we do it is the radical way, is the better way, is the best way. That's not true at all. It's individual, but I do think it comes off as very radical. So I actually thought, why not? We'll embrace that word radical in a healthy term, a healthy expression of it. Yes, we love radically ourselves. We live radically in the way we take care of ourselves. And I think that's the answer. And this is just how we do it, but that's the answer for us as a work culture at Firefly, and how we express and model to people who come in. How do you live differently? How do you get out of this cycle? There is freedom there. And I think getting support and having a community is so important. And that's why, going back to this, we do everything we can to create community at our clinic and also in our online community space. And what you said earlier about how much energy it takes to not just set down, create a foundation, and maintain a community. I know. And I was like, feel like you're speaking to me on some level. I'm like, yep, that's been my journey. But it's when you have the pillars there and people come in and it's been anchored, and then you bring people in who also can stay there as well, it creates this circle that just gets closer and closer. And then anyone who comes in is welcomed. And especially because we're trauma informed, as I said, and we do our best to set the tone for whenever we have gatherings and tell people this is what we have here and this is how we don't operate here. And there's nothing wrong with if you operate that way. We just don't do that here. And I think that creates safety and the healing that is so needed. So do you have any, further, advice for any healers or helpers out there, if they're taking their first steps in reaching out for support, understanding their, burnout possibly for them, or understanding, hey, might be trauma. What steps can they take for their journey that would be helpful for them?
Well, first of all, if you've listened to this and you're resonating and you feel like you're identifying, oh gosh, I think I'm burned out. I think I may have some some trauma here that needs to be explored. Kudos to you and sending so much compassion to you. So just know that I'm speaking to you directly. I think you can certainly Google, use good old Google and see who's around you. These days, I'm an online therapist. If you're an adult in general, you can find resources very fast and accessible therapy. Kids is a different story because kids often need in-person therapy. But because of online therapy opening sort of the door to accessibility. We have the ability to reach people throughout the state. For instance, I'm licensed in Pennsylvania. I also have an online practice availability in Florida. So I'm actually able to see clients as a licensed practitioner in those two states. Some other therapists, have multiple states, and some just practice within their state. But within that state, they can see anyone in there. A lot of people don't realize that about licensed therapists. So if you are looking for a licensed therapist, you can certainly, I'm a part of Open Path Psychotherapy Collective. So you can look that up and search in your statewide community. And, there's lots of other collectives out there. Inclusive Therapists is a great one too. You can look up and search. You can search for gender or age or modality, if you know that you like a certain modality in therapists. So those are great options to start when it comes to seeking a therapist. And in general, I think, again, like having just one person to be your support system who understands and sees you, I think is a great place to start too. Perhaps there's a colleague or someone in your life that a partner that, just expressing your feelings and knowing that you're not alone and that they see what you're going through can be also a great start. I think a lot of people do the burnout stuff on their own or even just don't share their story because they're afraid, and just know that you're not alone. And if there is someone that you feel drawn to that feels like a safe person, to start there, that they could be your first companion through this journey for you.
Well, I have two more questions for you for today. But my last two questions that I ask all my guests if they've been on here for the first time. Currently, what is your favorite product, wellness topic, or self-care indulgences at this time?
Oh, so many things. I'm a little dabbler. I love like dabbling and stuff. I was just, maybe because we're on a podcast, of like, I'll just, share a little bit of my podcast list with you guys. I love your podcast. I'm getting caught up in all of your amazing episodes. But I regularly listen to Hidden Brain. Love it because it just always teaches me something. Code Switch, again, an amazing one. Getting Curious, Jonathan Van Ness. Often language warning for that. I also listened to This Jungian Life, which it does have dream work attached to it for those of you who may be interested in Carl Jung and his amazing theories. And also the astrology podcast is a must listen for me. I love, again, like archetypes and archetypal. I see it as an evolutionary astrology, in that like astrological wisdom can give us wisdom just as archetypes can. And so if we embody that, that wisdom in our own, it's fun. It's fun and it's informative, and certainly makes me feel like less irritable when I'm driving to and from Kingdom Come for practices and everything that I have to do as a mom of three.
That's amazing.
Tweens
Yeah,
and teens.
my mom used to drive me and my sister to piano and dance and all those things. And her escape was obviously reading novels and books, but she got to do it while she was sitting in the waiting room and didn't have the podcast or access to those. So I think those are, our modern form. We still can read too when we're sitting there waiting for, a soccer practice to end or whatever. But I do think that the podcasts are really supportive for allowing yourself to have that fun when you're on the errand running. Yeah. So the last question, Miss Allie, is if you could detox one thing in your life or the world right now, what would it be?
Both my rage and my helplessness when it comes to politics and sort of what's happening in the world.
Yeah.
Both of those extremes. I mean, nothing gets done. I know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that can be a self-indulgence, sitting in the helplessness or sitting in the rage.
Right.
But I think the happy medium is something that I need to move towards. So
I think so many out there, people can relate to that. And
Yeah.
what is that answer? I know everyone's unique and different. So it's definitely, again, better for the nervous system to find that
Indeed.
middle ground, right? Right. Yeah. So thank you so much for coming on. I just want to let you guys know that I want to have you back. First off, like, there's so many
100%.
cool things that we could talk about. But you're having a course coming up. It's a 4-week course for trauma conscious spiritual care providers. So that's a training for spiritual care providers. And this is a training for those who work in maybe spiritual care and who desire to have like a deeper understanding of how trauma affects your work and vocation. So I think this is fantastic. Fantastic. I'm actually going to launch this episode sooner just because it's coming out. I want to make sure that people are aware and have access to this. And of course, we'll share on our channels because it's so needed. This starts April 10th. So you have video content, learn on your own content, and then you have, looks like there's circle sessions, and then support from other people who are healers. So do you have anything else you want to share about this? I know you have scholarship options available as well, but is there anything else about this you want to share? So cool. I love it.
Yeah, no, it's a major passion of mine right now, in part because people are coming in and saying either they're activated or people they're working with are activated. What do I do? Or how do I best manage that ethically and with consciousness? And so this course is for you who work in spiritual care. You could be a Reiki practitioner or just self-identified as working with in spiritual care. I see a lot of chaplains and ministers as well, but it's really inclusive for those who are, in professional circles. So the biggest thing is that I don't turn anyone away for lack of funds. This is all about sharing information that can be helpful. And also the circle sessions, even though they're not required, they're really helpful because they're really integration sessions. So they're Fridays so that we can really listen into our own story and our own what is happening in our own work as to why why we need this information and like what we can do personally and professionally to provide safe space. So it's really about providing and protecting safe spiritual spaces. So we talk about lots of stuff, including some of the physiological stuff we touched on today. We talk a lot about burnout. We also talk about, boundary management. But in general, it's all about frameworking for you. Like each of us, by the end of the course, will have a framework for us as to moving forward with where we need shoring up and continually work with increasing consciousness around those different parts of our lives so that we're able to have a sustainable future in the work we do. Because we need our caregivers. We need our spiritual healers. We need them. We need them more than ever. So this is for you. Yeah.
I just got goosebumps all over my body. We do. We need you guys out there. And even those people who are stepping into this saying, I think I'm called to be a healer. You're going to need this work too, to help you avoid the burnout and have that awareness too. So thank you so much, Allie. I'm just so grateful for you being on the show, and I'm looking forward to having you back. I'm sure that we have so much of you out there who are really excited to hear more from her. So if you have questions too, send them in. I'm sure that we can absolutely riff on those and talk about them and go forward from here. But thank you guys again for listening. Thank you, Miss Allie, for being on the show, and be well until next time, my friends. Thank you for listening to the Mind Body Detox podcast. We wish you wellness and health in your mind, body, and spirit. And be well until next time, my friends.